This is Federalist Papers Revisited, a discussion of government and governing systems. And it's Federalist Papers Revisited because the Federalist Papers were a textbook on governing systems all back through antiquity and how they worked and how they chose what to use in their governing system that we created with the Constitution in the U.S. And what I want to start with today is I want to pose the most basic question that we have in a governing system, and that is, what is a Congress? So when you look at back in the documents like the Declaration of Independence and other things like that, you see that they had what they call General Congress, a General Assembly. So what is a Congress? And I'm not asking what is Congress that we have today in Washington or even in our states, what those Congresses are. I'm asking you, what is a Congress in general terms? And what we find is that a Congress is a meeting. It's a general assembly of people or whatever in a meeting, and they discuss where they can discuss issues that they have or raise grievances or raise questions or things like that in a general setting. So they have a mutual interest, and they call a meeting, and that meeting is a Congress. So when you go back to the Declaration of Independence, the states were already meeting in a General Congress. And what it says there is that the United States of America in General Congress assembled. And that's basically where they wrote the Declaration of Independence, and ratification of the agreement on the Declaration of Independence was basically to sign their names onto the Declaration of Independence of each state. So the people who were there were delegates of the state. They were empowered by the state to meet and discuss the writing of the Declaration of Independence. They wrote the Declaration of Independence, and then all the states that wanted to sign on to that Declaration of Independence signed on to it and ratified it, and that's how they became a confederacy, which is a aggregate assembly in a common cause against a common enemy. So that's what the first Congress was. It was just a meeting, an assembly. The United States in Congress assembled. So once they filed for their Declaration of Independence, they had to move on. And they had to come up with a way of giving structure to how they could make collective decisions, because this is a collective. It's a union. So they have to be able to make decisions collectively. So when they first, after they signed the Declaration of Independence, they moved on, and they immediately started writing the Articles of Confederation. Now, what did the Articles of Confederation do? Well, what they did was they took that meeting that they had, Congress, and they empowered it as a decision-making body, and they gave protocols and structure to how that assembly would be done, what the rights of suffrage were, and what constituted a majority consensus of all the states to mean that they had actually made a decision. So when you look at documents like the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution as well, what they are doing is that they are only forming Congress as a decision-making body, and they have been empowered by that document to make those decisions based on the protocols that they have set forth for a quorum, which is how many states need to be present in order to have the meeting, the distribution of suffrage, which is each state gets what weight of vote in the making the decision, and then the majority consensus. What's the level of for majority consensus? Is it a simple majority of 50%? Is it 2/3, or what is it? So you have the structure, and then from that structure you have legislative process. So the legislative process is that act of doing the discussion and then voting and then coming to a majority consensus. That's the legislative process. So when you look at the Articles of Confederation, the Congress was the states assembled as equals. They had equal suffrage, meaning they had one vote on all measures, and they needed 2/3 of the states to agree in order to come to majority consensus. In the Constitution, they have two legislative assemblies, two legislative processes. One is a Republican form of government, which consists of the House, which is a proportional assembly of the states. The states get proportional suffrage in the House, and they come to a majority consensus by a proportional summation, which comes to 50%. At 50% by proportion is passage. Then another part of the Republican government system is you have the Senate, and in the Senate each state has is assembled equally. They each have 2 senators. They each have one vote. They in the Senate, just like they did under the Articles of Confederation, and under the Republican form, the legislative process, it's by majority, simple majority, for passage. So you have simple majority in the House, simple majority in the Senate, passes a law. Under the Confederate Assembly, which is just the Senate, it's assembled and suffrage is distributed, and you come to a majority consensus exactly the way that they did under the Articles of Confederation, which is you need a majority to form a quorum. 2/3 of the need to come to a majority consensus. Each state has one vote. Basically, they have one vote, but it's split between both of their senators for other reasons. It's not to give the state less than one vote, but each state has to have both of their senators present in order to realize their one vote. They have equal suffrage, but it comes through 2 votes. These are 2 different, in other words, federal governments. The Republican government is for laws and interstate interactions. The Confederate Assembly is for treaties and international issues. So you have two different assemblies acting at the same simultaneously, and they are independent of each other, as the House is independent of the Senate. But they both are assemblies of what? The states. You don't have assemblies of parties. You don't have assemblies of... No, the states are assembling. The states are are coming to a majority consensus through their votes, and the states make all the decisions. Period. They don't. There is no, and this assembly is rigid. The way that the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation are written, it basically says in the Articles of Confederation that each state can bring 2 to 7 delegates, and when determining the questions, votes on the questions, each state gets 1 vote. Doesn't matter how many delegates they have. Under the Constitution, you have each state has proportional assembly and proportional suffrage in the House, and they vote to as a block, as their percentage on the question, and the majority it carries the motion. In the Senate, you have equal assembly of the states. They have an equal vote, and they have to have a majority consensus. So when we think about a Congress, we have to understand, before we even assemble the Congress, what the Congress is, which is an assembly, how that the Congress is assembled, which is rigid. There's no contingent on voting or anything like that. The states have their assembly and suffrage before they send delegates. And you have to understand the legislative processes that are being utilized to make decisions. So both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution both only assemble Congress. And they detail what the legislative processes are and how they work, how they come to majority consensus on questions in each body. Today, we've kind of departed from that model, and in fact, the states aren't represented anymore. The parties are, and the parties are coming to a bipartisan majority consensus. This is wrong. So before we can even talk about governing systems, we have to understand what the Congress is. Now, they met in a Congress in order to declare their independence, but they didn't have a government. So in order to form a government, they empowered that Congress, that assembly, as the established government authority. The United States in Congress assembled. And if you read through the Articles of Confederation, which we will cover later, you will see that in Article 1, they named the country. They said the style of this confederacy is the United States of America. And then in Article 2, they said that all the states had to comply with decisions made by the United States in Congress assembled. And those decisions are made by the legislative process that are detailed in the rest of the document. But that right there empowered the United States in Congress assembled to make those decisions and come to those majority consensuses in order to get the states to comply with the decisions that were made. So this is why you have to understand what is a Congress. So that's where we're going to start, so that we understand what a Congress is, and then we're going to talk about the different types of governing systems, democracy and Republican government, and the role of voting, and then we'll talk about the Articles of Confederation, then the Constitution. So that's enough for the first day, and we'll call it quits there.